Good morning, everyone. This is Mrs. Kardos. Welcome back. Today we're going to learn about subtracting integers. So make sure you have your paper, your pencil, your notes if you have some, and we'll get started. Remember, as we go along, if you need to pause the video to work some problems and then come back to the video to see if you got them correct, that would be a great way to use this video for practice. So our learning target for today is that we'll be able to subtract integers, and we're going to show that by completing lots of practice problems here. So let's take a minute to review here at the beginning. So we are going to be subtracting integers, so let's just remind ourselves of what integers are. Integers are all the negative whole numbers, all the positive whole numbers, and 0. And here's a visual representation of that on the number line. Notice there are no fractions or decimals on the integer number line. So previously we have learned how to add integers, and we learned on a number line to begin with. We said if we start at 0, we always start at 0. And in this example problem, the first number was 5, positive 5, so we moved forward 5 spaces on the number line. And then the second number was negative, so we jumped back 3 spaces because negative would be backwards. And we wound up on a positive 2. So that's how we worked on adding integers. And then we also did the 2 color counters. We said in this particular example, like let's think of it of like having a party. I had a party. I have 5 positive people over to the party, and then I invited 2 more. How many people are at my party? Well, I have 7 people at the party, and they're all positive. And it works the same way with negative. If I only invite negative people to the party, then I'm going to wind up with 7 negative people at the party. But then we talked about, well, what if I have some positive people and some negative people? Well, if I have 1 positive and 1 negative, they kind of cancel each other out. They make what we call a 0 pair. I like to say they left the party. So they left our party. They're gone because they make 0, and that leaves us with a positive 3 people at the party. And then we talked about how number lines and 2 color counters, they're not very good when we have really large numbers because no one wants to draw 10 or 30, smiley faces or frowny faces and drawing number lines over and over, so we need to learn the rules. So the first rule that we learned was that if the signs are the same, we're going to add. So in these 2 examples, the first one, they're both positive, so I add them up. In the second example, they're both negative, so I add them up. And then the second rule that we learned, which is this: if the signs are different, then we're going to subtract. So if we have 1 of each. And then at the end, we just decide which sign it is by which one we had more of. So in this first example, 30 was larger, so it was positive, so we made it a positive 20. And in the bottom example, the 30 was negative, so we have more negatives than positives, so it would be negative 20. These 2 rules are going to be super helpful when we start subtracting integers today, because we can't learn about subtracting if we don't know how to add. So make sure you're really comfortable with adding first and then move into subtraction. And we can think of subtracting integers as adding the opposite. Adding the opposite. So let's talk about what that means a little bit. So if I had this number line, because we started with number lines when we did positives, so let's start with a number line this time. So the first number was positive 5, so I would draw my little arrow from 0 to 5. And then if it had been a plus problem and I was adding a negative 1, then I would have gone backwards this way 1 because it's negative. But that subtraction sign, it means to do the opposite of whatever's going to come next. So instead of going backwards, I'm actually going to go forward. So even though it's a negative number, I'm going to go forward, and I wind up on positive 6. So if I start on 5 and I take away a negative 1, I'm going to wind up on positive 6 because I need to do the opposite. Now, some students see it really well when I do the number line, but most students see it better when I use the two color counters. So let's start with, I have 5 positive people at the party, and I want to subtract a negative, but I don't have any red counters. So how am I going to subtract a negative? Well, I could add a 0 pair to the party. And this does not change the value of the party. The party is still only worth 5 here, because this is worth 5 and this is worth 0. So the value is still 5. So I haven't changed anything by adding the 0 pair. But now I have a negative that I can subtract. So once I subtract out that little negative from my party here, then what do I have left? Well, I have 6 positives left. So I started with 5. I wanted to subtract a negative, but I had to add a 0 pair to have a red one to be able to subtract. And then once I subtract my negative, I'm left with 6 positives. Now, every time we have a subtraction problem, we're going to rewrite it as an addition problem. When you were in elementary school, some of your teachers might have taught you a little thing to help you remember how to divide fractions, or maybe in 6th grade, where they taught you to do keep, change, flip. Well, when we do subtracting integers, I like to think of it as keep, change, opposite. We're going to keep the first number. We're going to change the subtraction to an addition, and then we're going to take the opposite of whatever the second number is. So keep, change, opposite. So if I look at my example here, you can see that I kept the -8, I changed the minus to a plus, and then the opposite of +3 is -3. These two sentences, they are the same. They equal the same thing. Okay, they both equal -11. It doesn't matter which way that I write it, they both equal -11. So once I've changed it into a plus problem, then we're just going to use those rules that we learned before about if the signs are the same, I add them up. If the signs are different, I'm going to subtract. So let's go here and do an example. And remember, you can pause the video as we go along and try it for yourself, and then turn the video back on to see if you have it correct. So if I start with letter A, see if you can rewrite it. All right, so if I'm going to rewrite it, I would have -5, I'm going to keep. The minus changes to a plus, and then this is a +7. So I'm going to change it to a -7. And I'm going to write the parentheses just to keep my plus sign and my negative from kind of running into each other. Now I can ask myself those same questions that I asked myself last week over and over and over again. Are my signs the same or different? Well, in this one, they're the same. They're both negative, so I'm going to add them. And 5 plus 7 is 12. And since everybody at the party was negative, it's going to be -12. All right, take a moment, try letter B on your own, and then come back to the video. All right, I'm going to keep the 8, change the minus to a plus, and the opposite of -2 is +2. And you guys have all known since first grade, 8 plus 2 is 10. So if you got that right, give yourself a little check there on your paper. And if you didn't get it right, make sure you change it. Don't leave the wrong answer on your paper. All right, let's try letter C. Take a minute, pause the video. All right, I'm going to keep the -6, change the minus to a plus, and the opposite of -7 is +7. Now, my signs are different. I have some negatives, some positives, so some of them are going to cancel each other out. I'm going to subtract. 7 take away 6 would be 1, and I have more positives. So the answer should be +1. If you got that correct, give yourself a check. If you didn't, fix it, change it. Now try the last one, letter D. All right, so the first number is -2. I'm going to keep it, change this to a plus, and the opposite of -1 is +1. Now I have one of each. I have some negative, some positive, so I'm going to subtract. 2 take away 1 is 1, and I have more negatives this time, so it would be -1. And that's all there is to it. So if you'll just remember, subtraction is the same as adding the opposite, or keep, change, opposite, then you won't have any difficulty doing these problems. And did we do our learning target today? Yes, we did. We are able to subtract integers now. I hope this video was helpful to you, and if you need to, watch it over again. Thanks for stopping by and listening to the video. Hopefully you made it this far, and I'll catch you in the next one. Bye.